What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I am here with my homie, Ash Rogers. How are you doing, my friend?
I am awesome. It's great to be back. Good to see you.
You too, you too. How is your quarantine going?
You know what? It's all right. I'm getting used to it. I'm happy it's the summer. We're spending some time outside, so going good. How about you?
Awesome. I'm waiting for the summer to arrive. The Pacific Northwest has decided to maintain the spring through July. I'm waiting for
Okay.
summer to arrive. I got a new boat. It'll be great to take out in the sun, but come on, son. If you want to do a sun dance for me, I would take it.
Got it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so Ash is back with us today. She's going to actually show us SharePoint document approvals. This is something a lot of you have been asking for. I've done, 10 approvals videos, and they're either on forms or SharePoint lists. I even did one on Excel, but I haven't done one on SharePoint documents.
There you
So
go.
you're here to fix that. You agreed. You said, I got this. This is going to take us no time at all. I will show the good people how to do it. So, Ash, why don't you go ahead, take a second, reintroduce yourself to everybody, and then go ahead and take it away.
Okay, so like John said, we're here to talk about SharePoint document approvals today. My name is Ashley Rogers. I've done a couple of these videos with John before. There's an HTTP series that we've done together. So if you're not familiar with that and you're interested in learning about HTTP actions in Microsoft Power Automate, go check those out. I do a lot with SharePoint and Power Automate. I've been doing SharePoint for about 10 years, Power Automate for the last 2 or so. Love putting them together, love teaching you guys all about how to use them. I do speaking and blogging as well. So if you want to follow me and check out my blog, there's my blog. It's spinbetween.blogspot.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Ash Rogers.
Do it. Both of those will have links down in the description as well, so you can click them nice and easy.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So talking about SharePoint document approvals is actually a lot less complicated than you might think. The way that SharePoint handles documents is a bit different than items. And so there's a lot of gotchas if you're used to working with documents in SharePoint. And so maybe it feels a little uncomfortable, but the approval part is really not that big of a deal. So it's about the same as doing an approval on an item because it treats it as an item. You're doing an approval on the actual document itself. The part that becomes complex is whether or not you're going to bring people over to SharePoint to actually look at that document, or if you're going to surface that information directly in something such as Outlook. It's easy to do an approval on a SharePoint item because you can bring all of the data from the item and put it right there into the approval email. So that's great. We can do that with the metadata inside of SharePoint documents as well. But if you actually want somebody to read the document itself, that's where it gets a little tricky.
Yeah, I probably
So
want someone to approve off the content of the document rather than the date it was created or who made
exactly. Exactly.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of the triggers that we're going to be looking at today specifically is the automatic trigger of when a file is created. So when something runs, immediately as soon as a document is uploaded. We'll go over a couple of gotchas there just about that trigger in general when working with documents. But when we're really going to dive into this is what we're going to use the custom action for the selected file. That one's going to be a manually triggered flow that we're going to do, but it's going to cover everything that you need to do in order to actually get somebody to look at the content of the document.
Sweet.
Okay, so one other piece to this, when we are actually bringing that content, forward and surfacing it inside of, like I said, Outlook, for instance, we're actually going to be using something called approval attachments. Now, you might have seen videos done on this. I believe Daniel Laskowitz did a couple of them with you.
Yep.
And so he's the guy to go look for if you want to know some of the tips and tricks to actually tweaking the content and making sure that that works seamlessly inside of Power Automate. But that's much more of like an administrator type of task. So check that out if you want to know more about it. But we're going to leverage approval attachments today. And we want to use them because it really does bring the experience into one space. So we're doing our approval inside of Outlook. We're doing the actual content preview inside of Outlook as well, using the approval attachments. But there are things such as the file size limit that you're going to want to check out other videos for. So if you have really large documents or you've got like really nice high-res photos that you're actually approving, that's when you're going to need to know about the file size limit and adjusting that. The other piece here is that we're going to be managing our document editing during approval. So we're going to leverage two different document libraries. We'll go through this, but we're leveraging two different document libraries. One is going to be the source, where people are doing their edits, and then they're going to start routing a document for approval from the source. But then we're also going to have a destination library where once it gets there, it's locked for editing, and we can be certain that whatever it is that you approve when you see that content, it's not going to get changed. So we definitely want
That's
to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's a question that comes up often, actually. I think in a lot of my approvals, that's something that I have tended to overlook is that editability. And so that's a consistent question. How do I lock this file during approval so that no one can tamper with it? So that's awesome. You're going to cover that.
Oh yeah, very cool. All right, so I love demos. They're my favorite part. So let's just jump right in and do this.
Do it.
All right, so I'm here inside my SharePoint site. I have this TerraFlora site that I love to use for all of my demos. And for today's purposes, I've got two different document libraries, as I mentioned. One is just the default documents library that comes with any site. This is the shared documents library. That's the internal name of it. And then I've got an approval requests library. And this is going to serve as the destination, the place where you know that once I've made this request, this is where it's locked down for editing. So the first thing I'm going to do is check out this documents here. And we're going to look at what happens when I upload a document and working with the trigger that is when a file is created. So I already have a document in here, and that's great. This is good for test data, just kind of understanding what's there. We can see the document. I've got a place for a status. We can say routed or, under edit or under review, something like that, where you want to manage your process inside of here. We also have approver comments. So if for instance, in this situation, the approver has something to say about it, they can say, okay, well, I rejected it for this reason, or, looks good to me as it does here. And we can capture that directly inside of SharePoint just by coming back and bringing that information in here. So I'm going to go ahead and upload a new file. And I've got my test docs here. Okay. So now, since this is an automatic trigger that's running behind the scenes, I'm going to go ahead and stop looking at SharePoint and head over to Power Automate. And what we have is a trigger here that says when the file is created, and we're looking at the properties. We're going to go ahead and start and wait for an approval. This is the most straightforward type of approval that you can do. So all this does is it brings into Outlook the actual approval, so somebody can come in and say accept or reject for that. And then in here, in the apply to each, what we're doing is looking at the responses that are coming back. So we're just doing a quick compose here to throw the responses from the approval into the compose. And then we have an action here for SharePoint to update the file properties. So in here, we've got all of the same details that we would expect. I've filled them in because I found that it's important to make sure that we include things such as the title and the status, even on an update, even if the title and the status already exist, because SharePoint tends to be a little funky with Power Automate. I don't know if you've experienced this, John, but sometimes when you don't fill in something here for like a title or a status or maybe even a dropdown, you actually get a blank back in the source.
Yeah, so that's a consistent thing. I always recommend fill in every field, and that's where copying and pasting actions comes in really handy. In the olden days, I used to have to fill each update field by hand, even if there was 20. Now you can copy paste, so that's at least a plus. But yes, always fill in every field because it will get overwritten with null values if you leave it blank.
That's exactly right. So in this case where I'm doing this approval here, and I've just added my regular start and wait for approval, everything that's familiar to you, and I'm using this then, the responses comments, the responders comments here, I want to make sure that I fill in all of that. And I just stick the approver comments right in here. And if we come back to our documents here, this is what got updated before, is our approver comments just come in here and get captured. So it's pretty straightforward. If that's your use case, it's super easy. But when you do the approval on something like this, and you're not sending the actual content of the file over to someone, what's happening is they're going to end up coming back to SharePoint. So there's going to be a link there. If we come back in here, we can provide a link inside of the approval, as I did here, the link to item, and then the description here. But when somebody clicks on that, it's actually going to open it up in SharePoint, and we don't want that. So we're going to go and show you how to do, actually bring the content into somebody immediately right where they are when they're actually approving.
Sweet.
So let's get out of this one. And we're just going to open this one up, the route document and request approval. But before we go into it, let's go ahead and start this running. Okay. Let me check out my approval requests and make sure that for our purposes here, we don't have anything in here, because if I have a document that already has the same name, I've actually set up my flow to make sure that it fails, so I don't overwrite somebody else's document. It's easy to kind of do that, especially if you're sending from multiple sources or there's multiple people working on these things. We want to make sure that we don't have any issues overwriting. So in here, we're going to go back to our documents library. So remember, this is serving as the source. And I've already routed this one, this test doc2, for an automatic approval using the other trigger. But in this case, I'm actually going to create a different type of custom action that we're going to do. So I have it set up, but I want to show you how you would end up getting that. If we come down to automate here and drop this down, and then we do create a flow, we're going to get a whole bunch of options straight from inside of SharePoint. And it's super easy to find the one that I like the most, because you just keep clicking show more, and then you go all the way to the bottom, and it's the very last one here. This gives you the most flexibility. So this is a custom action for the selected file. And when you click on that, you get brought over to Flow, to Power Automate rather, and it tells you what it's going to do for you. And you go ahead and click on Continue. Everything's in SharePoint as far as the trigger goes. It's for the selected file, and it's going to set this up for you pretty quickly. So it's already filled in for you where that came from. The selected file is going to be in this particular site, in that particular library. You don't need to go find it. And then it's automatically going to give you this get file properties. The get file properties is obviously not going to get the content for you, so we have to handle that a different way. But this is a really great start, because this gives you the most flexibility to do whatever it is you want to with that document, just doing a whole custom flow for it. So I already have this built out. So let's go ahead and look at this. So as I showed you in the other one, we've got the for a selected file and the get file properties. But what I've added onto this is this move file action. And this is an out-of-the-box action. It's something that you can go find when you look for SharePoint actions. Just type in move file. And what this allows you to do is pick the file to move. You can make this a dynamic content if you want to, but I know that I'm going to be working with test doc2 today. But you would just put in here dynamic content, the actual name of the file. And then I know where I want to put this, right? So it's going to be the same site. It could be a different site if you wanted to. It's pretty flexible that way, but it's going to be the same site. And then the destination folder is actually not just a folder. What you need to do here is specify which library it's actually going into. So don't get confused when it says destination folder. It actually does need to include the name of the library itself. Otherwise, it's going to try to add it to the site itself, and it'll fail.
Well, and the easy way to do that is just click that folder on the right-hand side over there, and you can just literally navigate through there. So then you don't have to even know what it is. You can just, oh yeah, that's right, it's in there, it's in there, it's in there. Click, click, click. Yep,
that's exactly right. So you can go as deep as you want to. If there are folders you need to route to, they'll show up in there as well. So we've got our destination set up. And then you also have a choice here, what to do when the file is already there. So if another file already has that same file name, you can choose what to do. This is actually much more robust than it was about a year ago. This was a little tricky to try to handle, and this is much more flexible now. So I've chosen to fail the action because what I want to do is handle that with some error handling and some understanding of what to do and kind of alerting the user that, hey, that file is already there. But if your particular use case is a bit simpler, then you can say move with a new name, if that's fine. If you'd like for SharePoint to rename it for you, that's fine. But then you can also replace it. If you know that what you're doing is sending a new version of the file in and you know that you're going to need to replace it, go ahead and pick replace. But for our purposes, we're going to fail the action.
Cool.
So after that goes ahead and we move the file. So it's either going to fail or it's going to be successful. If it fails, what I've done is set up an email. And you can tell that I've configured how this runs because we've got these little red dots, the little ... here with the red arrow. And that indicates to somebody else looking at this that I've actually configured the run after. So if we go to this ellipsis, this is a very cool way to handle errors inside of Power Automate. Go to the ellipsis and then hit configure run after. And in here, we say this should run after this particular move file action, which is the directly preceding action, after the move file action has failed or has timed out. So we can say is successful, which is the default. So usually when you have sequential actions, this is already picked, right? So is successful, everything's going to run in sequence, everything's going to try to run, and then the flow will fail if you don't have error handling. But for our case here, I've picked has failed or has timed out so that I can send an email to my user that says, hey, the approval request failed to start on the document move. So that way the user knows, okay, great, there's something going on with this, I can check it out. So the next piece here, this scope that I've created, this actually handles what happens when the file is moved successfully. So this is everything that I'd like to happen. This is the happy path. So what I've done here is configured this run after on the entire scope, not on the individual actions, but on the entire scope. If the send an email has been skipped, then I go ahead and run it. Because the only time the send an email error handling is going to be skipped is if the move file was successful.
I like that. That's cool. Little bit of using conditions without using conditions.
That's right. Yep.
Nice. Nice.
Don't need nested conditions if you use some scopes and
Yeah, I
some
like
error
it.
handling. Right. So inside of our happy path, inside the scope, if it runs properly because the file has been moved, then what we're going to do is, this is the crux of what we're trying to do to get people to be able to see that file. We're going to go ahead and do a get file properties. This is the second version of this. I have not renamed them. You'll want to make sure you name these properly when you're doing this in production, but for demonstration, we do another get file properties. And the reason we do another one and we don't leverage this first one is because now the document exists in a different library. It no longer exists in the source. So we actually have to get it completely differently. It's going to have a new ID inside of the destination library. So we go ahead and hit the destination library, the approval requests, and we want to get all the file properties for that basically new document. So after that, we're going to go ahead and get the file content, which is, again, an out-of-the-box SharePoint action. And we grab the file content, and we use the identifier. This is the dynamic content that we need to actually use to grab the file itself. It's not necessarily the ID, but the identifier of the document. And what that allows us to do is actually just get everything that's inside of that. All right, and afterwards, what we do is throw in our approval action. So again, very straightforward. If you're used to approvals, we have the everyone must approve. I picked that. If that's different for your use case, if the first person needs to approve, you can choose something different. I've titled it appropriately, new SharePoint document. I've assigned it to myself. You can do that dynamically as well. You can have a list of people to pull from if you did need different assignees for different conditions and things like that. But I've hard-coded myself for here. And then you can add details. And this would be a great place to put any of the metadata around the document. So maybe, when it was created, or maybe the status or department, something appropriate there can fit inside the details.
Yeah, the
But I'm not,
details is
go ahead.
the body of
Right.
the approval, right? So all your major information you're going to want to stuff in that details line. I know it looks small, but that's really where you want to put all the bulk of your approval information.
Yeah, you can actually expand that pretty
There you
good. So you can put
go. Nice.
whatever you need to inside there. So different from what we did with the first approval when it was super straightforward and we just put a link to the item, I'm actually going to skip the item link in this case, and I'm going to go to show advanced options. And when I open that up, what I've done here is we've got a space for approval attachments. And there's two pieces to having the approval attachment. And the first is the name, and then the second is the content. And if you're familiar with working with documents, that totally makes sense. We've got the name, and then we actually have the bulk of what's inside the document itself. So what goes inside the name is just the name of the document, and then I've put a .docx there to indicate the file type. There are ways to do that dynamically. If you're using one particular file type, that's fine, you can hard code it, but in this case, you do have to indicate what type of document it is so that Outlook actually knows, your computer actually can give you the right preview. And inside the attachment's content, I'm actually just putting the file content, which comes from this action up here. So once we've got the file content, we put that in here, we're all set, and then we can go ahead and test this bad boy.
Sweet.
All right, so again, checking to make sure that I don't have anything in my approval requests destination library.
All clean.
And we go back, go to documents, and I'm going to choose this one, and then I'm going to do automate, and then I'm going to choose my route document and request approval. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say run flow. Cool.
There it goes.
Yep. So let's go ahead and check it out. So it is running.
6 seconds. Nice. Great success.
All right, so now it's thinking. So I love when it's thinking on the move file action, because then I know that it's worked. Because it will fail immediately if it doesn't work. So see that this has now been skipped. The send an email was skipped appropriately because the file was moved.
Yep.
And now what we're doing is we're waiting to hear the little ding from the email to make sure that we've actually gotten that. So I'm waiting to grab that. Cool. All right. So I know this is the one that we're waiting for because this was just a minute ago.
Yep.
And so this is pretty cool. Let's check it out. This is the email that we got from the flow here.
Nice.
We have our regular approvals details. This is going to look super familiar. Under my details, I have please review and approve the attached document. And I can do that here. I've got reasons. I can put in my reject, all that good stuff. But what we've done is added here this test doc 2, and this is a really cool preview. I already know that it's Word document. I see that it's an attachment. I could have put more than one in here, but what I'm going to do is drop this down and say preview and get this great experience right inside of Outlook.
Love it.
Yeah, so I could have all my information right here. I can read through the document as I need to, and then straight from here inside the preview, I'm going to go ahead and say yep, okay. So of course, I just locked my computer. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and say, looks good to me.
Looks good to her, too.
Oh, yeah. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and check out the flow. And now we've got this as it's run successfully. So let's check out the scope and see what was in there. We've had no problems. We know it's been successful. So if you were interested in looking at, anything that comes back from any of these, this is a great place to look, is in the actual run. You get lots of details about what's happening. And the same thing here, you can look inside the approvals and see the responses. If you had multiple approvers, it's all in here, just like any other approval that you might be working with. So let's go take a peek at SharePoint and confirm that what we think happened.
If it went into our approval requests thing.
That's right. Yep. So no longer in documents, and it's over here in approval requests.
Bam.
There you go. So Looks good to me. So there you go. That's how you make sure that somebody actually has the content in front of them and can and approve right there from Outlook. Makes it super simple for the users. It's a great experience.
In no time. Okay, so a couple things to recap, just in case you guys were sleeping. One, Ash showed us how to make sure that a document gets moved programmatically to a new library where permissions are so that it can't be edited, so that it cannot be tampered with, so that you know that the thing you're seeing is the thing that was requested for approval. That's the first one. That move file action is where she did that. And then second, made sure that when an attachment, when an approval did come through, it had all the relevant information right there. And so imagine, instead of having to click a button to go into SharePoint, to click again to open the document and view it, to then close that and close that to go back to your email and approve. Now you saw, right? Opened up a preview, boom, right there in the same pane, approve or reject, love it, hate it. Let's move on. Let's save time. I like it.
Good stuff.
Really good stuff. Ash, thanks so much. You are killing it with SharePoint on my channel. I feel like all the awesome SharePoint secrets, you're nailing them.
Well, let's do more.
Let's do some more. You know what we should do? What our next series should be? I've been getting requests as the announcement of the deprecation of SharePoint Workflow Designer has happened.
Yes.
I have had a flood of requests about how do I deal with my classic site pages and how do I deal with this and that. And I can put together a nice list for you and we can look at modernizing. Right?
Let's do it. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm all
sweet.
for it. Yeah. Let's definitely do that. I think it's totally necessary. I think everybody's going to relate to that, and I'm all for it. It's something we do all the time.
Sweet. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. You heard it. I love it. I like how we always decide what we're going to do next before the previous video is over. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I love it. Cool. Keep it going.
All right. So you guys know what to do. Check the description. Follow Ash on Twitter. Get into her blog. If you want to check out the previous videos with all the technical information that Ash mentioned from Daniel Askowitz, that'll be in the description as well. In the meantime, click like, click subscribe, hit that little bell so that you don't miss any more videos. Much love from me. See you in the next one.
Bye, guys.